Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be working with the second half of our um, learning target, learning target 2. And we are going to be talking about how do I solve an equation. So it's the same learning target as last week's, for the last 2 weeks, but there's a big difference. So let's look at the essential question. It says, how do I solve equations using multiplication and division? So this time we're going to be using multiplication and division. That's the huge difference to find the value that makes it true. So we still want to balance. That's important. I want you guys to draw this just as a reminder. Draw ourselves a balance to remind ourselves we still want to do the same exact thing. Okay, balance it. We want to get it equal on both sides. But this time we're going to use multiplication and division. Now remember this, is that multiplication is the opposite of division there, and division is the opposite of multiplication. So we're talking inverse here. But I want to remind you something. If you see multiplication, you are going to see something like this, where a variable and a number are stuck together. There's no sign in between, okay? And then if you see division, you're going to see something like this, where you have a fraction with a variable and a number, and that fraction bar always means division. Okay, so the steps are still the same as from before. The first thing we always do is box the variable, right? So we're looking for the letter. We're looking for Miss Olton. The second thing we also do is we have to get everything away from Miss Olton by isolating the variable, right? That's how we get everything Miss Olton by herself, by doing the inverse. And don't forget, inverse means opposite. The opposite of multiplication is division, and the opposite of division is multiplication. And lastly, the third thing we're going to do is then we solve for the variable. So we figure out what the variable equals, x equals or y equals or whatever variable it is. So let's go through our learning skills, which are actually the steps for our problem. First, we box the variable. So we put a box around Miss Olton. Secondly, we isolate the variable by doing the inverse. So we're going to move it, right? We're going to move it to the other side. And then lastly, we solve for the variable. So we're actually going to have something like y equals or x equals or j equals or whatever it might be, okay? So those are the three steps that we always have to take in order to solve these. Now don't forget, before you get started, the first thing you always want to do is draw a wall. First thing, just so you can separate the two expressions, one on the left, one on the right. We're drawing our little balance beam is what we're doing. The second thing you always want to do is box the variable. In this case, the letter or the variable is j. And I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this fraction bar just a little bit darker so you can see it. Okay. The second step says to isolate the variable by doing the inverse. So we have to move this so that we can isolate the variable. So we want to bring that 5 over here, which is fine and dandy. But first we have to figure out, well, we have to do the opposite. We have to do the inverse. So what are we doing the opposite of? Well, right away when I looked at this problem, I saw fraction bar. I know it means division. So I know I have to do the opposite, which is multiplication. So let's do that. Now you notice I'm going to multiply using parentheses because that means multiplication also. You notice I put the 5 up on top, and I'll show you why in a minute. So we're going to move this over so that we can multiply. So I put it on top so that I could cross these out because 5 goes into 5 one time. So now we are finished with that side. We have Miss Olton all by herself, j equals. And on this side, we multiply 5 times 30. Well, 5 times 3 is 15. And then I just add that 0 at the end so I know it's 150. Okay, so let's double check it just to make sure. Our original problem was 30 equals j over 5. So I'm going to put this number right here. Okay, so I'm going to have 30 equals 150 over 5. So basically, we want to make sure both sides equal 30. Well, I know this means division, so I know I have to divide bottom into top. You can use a calculator, or you can do what I do. 5 goes into 15 3 times. 5 goes into 0 0 times. So we see that they're balanced on both sides. We are good to go. Okay, it's the same steps. Look, the first thing I want you to start doing is, if you look at the second problem, once you draw the line, the wall, The second thing I want you to do is notice what kind of problem it is. Oh, I see it's division because there's a fraction bar. So I know I'm going to have to multiply in this problem. All right, let's get it started. So step 1, box Miss Olton the variable. Step 2, take the inverse to isolate the variable. So I want to get everything away from Miss Olton, which means I'm going to bring that 7.3 over here. Well, I know I have to do the inverse, and I already figured that out. That's why I wrote it right here. I'm going to multiply. Again, don't forget, multiply by putting the number on top of the fraction so that you can cross them out. Okay, don't forget, once you move it, you can cross that out. So I end up with h equals, and I'm going to multiply 32 times 7.3, but don't forget that you don't need to do it without a calculator. I literally used my calculator and ended up with 233.6. Okay, let's check it. I have my h over 7.3, and I have my 32. That was my original problem, okay? So I need to take this number and put it right in there for the h. So I have 233.6 divided by 7.3. Remember, I always know this fraction bar means divided, equals 32. You won't really see that division sign like you did in elementary school anymore. Now you're going to be using the fraction bar to show division. And so I want to make sure that each side equals 32. If we did it right, they're going to be balanced, right? So I'm going to put into my calculator 233.6 divided by 7.3. And yes, we did it correct. We got 32 on both sides. So far, so good. Okay, let's look at the next one. I'm going to draw my bar, my wall. Okay, the second thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at it for a minute. Oh, I see it's multiplication. I can tell because that 2 and that x are stuck together right there. Okay, so I know it's multiplication, so I know I'm going to have to do division. I know somewhere in my problem I'm going to have to do division. Okay, so let's get started with our steps. First step, box the variable. There's my x, there's Miss Holton. Second step, isolate the variable. So I want to get Miss Holton all by itself, so I got to move this puppy right here. I got to move it over here. Okay, I know for sure it's multiplication because the 2 and x are stuck together, the variable and the number. So let's do the opposite. Let's divide by 2. We're doing the opposite, so we're going to divide by 2. Again, we have one number on top and bottom, so that can cross out. It really becomes a 1x, but 1x is the same as x, so I'm just going to put x here. I got Miss Holton all by herself. And then in my calculator, I'm going to type in 47 divided by 2, which equals 23.5. Okay, you guys know we have to check this just to make sure. Always do this, even on a quiz, on your work during class. So we have 2x equals 47. Remember, x is not multiplication anymore. It's just the variable x. All right, so I have to put this number in right here. So they're stuck together. I know it's multiplication, so I'll put my parentheses. What we want to see is that both sides equal 47. I'm really hoping they do so that we can tell if we did it right. So I'm going to put in my calculator 23.5 times 2. There it is. They're both equal. They are balanced. We are doing good. All right, let's work on our last one real quick. Again, always start with your wall just so it's there. And then you guys notice right away that this is multiplication because I can see it right here. The number and the variable are stuck together. So I know it's multiplication, therefore I know I'm going to have to do the opposite, which is division. Okay, so let's start with our first step. The first thing we do is it says we box the variable. So I find my letter, Miss Olton right here, boom. The second thing we have to do is take the inverse so that we can isolate Miss Olton or get everything out of the way, leave her alone. So I have to move that 12 over here. And I know that the 12 and m mean multiplication, so I'm going to do the inverse. I'm going to do the opposite. That's what I was talking about earlier. I'm going to divide by 12. Okay? So we know once we divide, 12 goes into 12 one time. So I have my m. We can cross those out. We always cross out what we move. Okay, let's do this other side. I know that this is going to be division. 12 goes into 2.4. So in my calculator, I type in 2.4 divided by 12. And I end up with 0.2. Notice how many of my answers are decimals. Just because you get a decimal doesn't make it wrong, I promise. Get used to it. All right, so let's try this out. The original problem was 2.4 equals 12m. So I have to make sure that I can put this right here and that both sides equal 2.4. That is my goal, to see if both sides equal 2.4. Okay, so let's put 2.4 here. All right, now let me multiply in my calculator. 12 times 0.2. And I end up with 2.4. So we did something right because our problem is balanced. It's the same on both sides.